Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologue. I'd like to encourage you to visit Guns Etc. They're strong supporters of our president and the principles our country was founded upon. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and it's a firearm lover's paradise. And for all your online firearms needs, just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks. Welcome back. Thursday, March 19th, 2020. This business about naming the coronavirus the Wuhan or China virus is, to put it mildly, vexatious. There's a lot to it. A lot. And we went through this with something else not long ago that had a lot of postmodern idiocy too. Islamofascism and radical Islam. You'll recall even Secretary of State Hillary Clinton then said the war against radical Islam is over. Use those phrases, be called an Islamophobe, be silenced. I always thought calling things by their proper name was not only important, but crucial. How much more so with what we are dealing with now? In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare wrote, "The forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name." Indeed, it is important to name things properly. And is there anything more eerily abstract than a virus? Again, there are a lot of reasons for this. Let's start with the most basic. As Andrew McCarthy put it, the president will be judged by how effectively his administration deals with the crisis, not by his banter about how well in hand things are, nor by counterportraits of ineptitude or his opposition. On that score, this weekend, Trump formally declared a national emergency under the Stafford Act. This 1988 statute empowers the executive, when a catastrophe strikes, to take robust measures in support of the response by overwhelmed state and municipal governments. This includes immediately making available about $50 billion in federal disaster relief funding. This is an extraordinary piece of authority. So, when is the invocation of emergency powers permissible? Congress has vested the president with this authority when a threat to the security and public health of any part of the United States is sufficiently grave to warrant a federal response. In our constitutional system, there are certain situations and categories of activity that automatically trigger federal activity, federal authority. Most prominent among them are foreign relations, foreign incursions, border security, and matters related to foreign commerce, as well as commerce between the states, which obviously may be impacted also by foreign commerce. Consequently, the origination of the virus in China and its transcontinental spread across the globe are highly relevant. They rationalize the president's authority to address the emergency with Washington's awesome resources. And despite what the communist Chinese government says, it did start there. Just as we call MERS or Lyme disease or the Ebola virus. Or until recently, the Spanish flu. Those who say this is discriminatory are all almost exclusively on the left because they never understood the distinction between condemning a tyrannous or autocratous leadership and its people. There's a distinction between the two. The people they imprison, the people they tyrannize are not the government. When Ronald Reagan condemned the Soviet Union leadership as an evil empire, the columnists went nuts, as did the Democratic Party. They ignored the true victims of that evil, the Soviet prisoners, who said that that was one of the greatest days of their lives because a truth was finally told. When we condemn Iran and its malocracy, ignored totally, fully by the left and Democrats, is that we are speaking up on behalf of the immiserated Iranian people who have known tyranny and autocracy for too long, who we want free. It reminds me of something Jack Kemp once said. Democrats aren't soft on communism, they're soft on democracy. Who here is mad at people of Chinese or Asian origin? My God, we love their culture, their restaurants, their food, their people. Indeed, it is right that we do so. But it is also the right and never the left that argues on behalf of Asians, particularly Chinese Americans, in court for being discriminated against when it comes to college admissions and other affirmative action programs that work against them. We conservatives work for them, not the left. We conservatives argue for them, not the left. We conservatives go to court on behalf of them, not the left, because we love people. We don't categorize values of human being based on race or ethnicity or anything else. Name me one person who was racially brutalized in anything like a hate crime who is here from the Middle East or the Congo because we hated MERS and Ebola. You can't. This is exactly the same reaction people had with phraseology like radical Islam or Islamofascism or Islamist. They never understood those were linguistic distinctions between normative Islam and its political and violent philosophies and actions. Because language means nothing to the left anymore except when it can become a weapon in their own hands. For example, they preferred, and President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton called, radical Islam by the word extremism or violence by extremists. Extremism of what? Extremists of or for what? Could it be, extremism of Islam? That never occurred to them. And neither did it occur to them that every time Islamist terrorism is committed, be it in New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, or Orlando, the terrorists tell us, nay, they shout to us who they are and in what name and religion and cause they are slaughtering us. The blame from the left and Democrats was always on those reporting the violence, when it should have been focused on those shouting and committing it. But there was a political trick the left, Clinton and Obama, all of them, played here. Osama bin Laden was, to them, an extremist. But guess who else was? Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan. Remember how many times their domestic and economic plans were called extremist by the Democrats. Think on that for a moment. So back to the Wuhan virus, if I may. There's something else at work here, too. Those most loudly condemning the use of the phrase Wuhan virus or China virus are those who have, do the Google count if you don't trust me, those who have put 10, 20, 100 times infinite more blame on Donald Trump for it than the Chinese government. How can that be? Well, to the Democrats, no matter what, there can only be one enemy, not opponent, enemy, and that is Trump. And it will serve to excuse any act of terrorism, slaughter, or tyranny. See how much more the left condemned Donald Trump for killing Qasem Soleimani, for example, than they did the actions and bloodlust and bloodletting and warmongering of Qasem Soleimani. See how much more angry they are at Trump now than they are at China's leadership. Which gets to everything from blame America firstism to cultural relativism. As David Harsanyi put it, if reports are correct, it was in Wuhan's popular wet markets that vendors were selling the bats and possibly snakes that may have caused the COVID-19 outbreak. Wet because the meat sold in its unsanitary stalls was only recently slaughtered. This kind of thing happens quite often, and not always in China, of course. But the avian influenza was likely transmitted to humans from chickens in a wet market, too. Scientists have been warning for years that the eating of exotic animals in southern China is a time bomb. Acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, also originated in China and probably jumped to humans through bats. Other coronavirus strains are also likely connected to bats. I hate to thrust my Western cultural values on anyone, but maybe it's time to stop eating bats. That's the cultural relativists' no-no. But tell me how it's wrong. And remind me what Donald Trump was wrong about when he said political correctness will kill us. Watch the news. Or try Mark Thiessen. Want to know why the U.S. economy is in free fall? Why restaurants and bars are closing, putting millions out of work, and why the airline industry is facing possible bankruptcy? Why schools across the nation are shutting down, leaving students to fall behind, and parents without safe places to send their children every day? Why the stock market is plummeting, wiping out the retirement and college savings of millions of Americans? Why the elderly are isolated in nursing homes, and tens of millions who don't have the option of teleworking have no idea how they will pay their bills? Answer: because China is a brutal totalitarian dictatorship. We are in the midst of a pandemic lockdown because the Chinese communist regime cared more about suppressing information than suppressing a virus. Doctors in Wuhan knew in December that the coronavirus was capable of human-to-human transmission because medical workers were getting sick. But as late as January 15, the head of China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention declared on state television that, quote, the risk of human-to-human transmission is low, close quote. On January 18th, weeks after President Xi Jinping had taken charge of the response, authorities allowed a Lunar New Year banquet to go forward in Wuhan, where tens of thousands of families share food and then let millions travel out of Wuhan, allowing the disease to spread across the world. It was not until January 23 that the Chinese government enacted a quarantine in Wuhan. If the regime had taken action as soon as human-to-human transition was detected, it might have contained the virus and prevented a global pandemic. Instead, Chinese officials punished doctors for trying to warn the public and suppressed information that might have saved lives. According to the Times of London, Chinese doctors who had identified the pathogen in early December received a gag order from China's National Health Commission with instructions to stop tests, destroy samples, and suppress the news. But recall, as Bernie Sanders said, apologist for every communist regime ever known, that it was this administration, not China, that was ill-equipped to deal with this because it was full of science deniers. Look, end of day, words and names must mean things. The miracle of the common noun is part of the glue that allows for human beings not only to communicate but to reason. The destruction and denial of the common noun, as much as the proper noun, or common sense, is the acetone of reason and true communication. You can say, not my president. You have that freedom here, unlike in China, but it's just not true. Until and unless you announce your citizenship, it's not true. But you won't do that, will you? And you won't move to China or Iran, will you? Because by denying common sense, you know you are lying. You just want to hit America and Trump first. And you well know the freedoms you enjoy would last about one day in the places you attack Trump for attacking. And you know, too, that there is a cause of our pandemic. And there is real cover-up. And there is real tyranny. And it brought us this. And it wasn't Donald Trump. So save your anger for the true vector and get your language right. It matters. So with all thy imagining and singing of the song Imagine, just remember you can't imagine tyranny away. And that's why forms of government matter. One cares for life. The other cares for itself. And that's the worst form of selfishness. Self-preservation based on lives that cost lives. Imagine that. I'm Seth Leibsohn. We'll be right back.